Here. My name is Leah Voss. I'm a third year PhD candidate here in the History Department at the University of Texas at Arlington. And I'm honored to introduce our panelists today from the Arizona Borderlands. So first closest to me is Anita Guijarro, who is a native Chisonan and graduated Pueblo High School and the University of Arizona. After graduating, she worked with the Pima County Teen Court, a juvenile court diversion program. And during her 26 years there, she became acutely aware of systemic injustice in the public school system, which then led her to run for the Tucson Unified School District Governing Board. She served on the TUSD board for 20 years until she was elected to the Pima County Board of Supervisors, where she is the first Latina elected to the board in 2020. And it's the first. And as chair, she approaches governing through a framework of collaboration and coalition building. And with values involving the public in board meetings and working to create an environment that de-escalates political polarization and is welcoming to all, especially to marginalized communities. And she lives in Tucson with her husband Saul and their 3 children. Next, we will have Dr. Anna Ochoa O'Leary. And she grew up in Clifton, Arizona, and was a leader and organizer of the Morenci Miners Women's Auxiliary during the 1983 to 1986 copper strike. The Women's Auxiliary established food, clothing, and picket lines, raised funds for the strikers' families, and went on speaking tours to raise public awareness about the strike. After the strike, Dr. O'Leary went on to earn an MA and PhD in anthropology. Her labor activism has informed her scholarship on Mexican women, immigration enforcement, and transnational migration on the U.S.-Mexico border. Twice designated a Fulbright Scholar, once for her work on repatriated migrant women, and again for her work on returned immigrant youth and educational goal setting. She has also been awarded a Public Voices Thought Leader Fellowship and an Academic Leadership Fellowship. Today, she is professor and head of the Department of Mexican American Studies at the University of Arizona, where she also co-directs the Binational Migration Institute. Her community activities include participation in several community groups, such as the Coalición de Derechos Humanos and the Fundación México. And last but certainly not least, we have Isabel Garcia, who is a human rights organizer and attorney in Tucson, Arizona. For over 22 years, she was a public defender, where she served as the head of the Pima County Legal Defender's Office for much of that time. She began championing migrant rights in the 1970s with the Monzo Area Council, which provided direct service assistance with immigration paperwork. After Monzo closed, she co-founded the Coalición de Derechos Humanos, continuing her advocacy for human rights by fighting the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border, as well as discrimination and human rights abuses. She participates in monthly community vigils to honor the more than 3,400 men, women, and children who have died or disappeared during their journeys crossing the border. Isabel has received many awards for her work in defense and promotion of the human rights of migrants, including the Mexican Human Rights Award in 2006 and the Alfonso Garcia Robles Award in 2018. So just like with our Texas panel this morning, we'll hear from each of our panelists about how they became involved in politics or community work. And then Vanessa Ramirez will open up the floor for questions. And I think so. Will you start this off?
Yeah, I have my little.
Questions. Okay.
My name is Adelita Shirley Grijalva. So my middle name, my first name comes from the song Adelita. I was supposed to be a junior, Raúl Grijalva Jr. So when I was born, they were like, oh, you're not a boy. So they didn't have a name for me. My mom really liked the name Marisol, and she liked Maribel. So she was like, okay. So she's like, okay, we're gonna do Maribel. So the nurse comes in, she's a very nice white lady. My mom is half white, half New Mexican, from New Mexico. She's a Mexican. So the herencia there. And so she's like, and she didn't speak Spanish, right? But she thought it was very important that I have a name, you know, that was very strong. So she's like, Maribel, that's a good name. So the nurse comes in and looks at my name and says, oh, Maribel, what a cute name. My mom's like, give it back. But, you know, her mom, my grandma passed away, my mom was 17. She's one of 5 daughters. So my mom helped, I mean, she raised 4 girls before I ever showed up.
Yeah.
So she was getting a lot of pressure to name her the first granddaughter after the grandma. And my dad's like, Mr. Chicana power with him, her daughter was gonna be named Shirley.
Yeah.
So they were fighting a little bit. So they couldn't figure it out. We listened, she's on this way to the hospital. Here's the song, Ciaderita. I was like, that's good. And then my mom's like, great. And then we're gonna put Shirley in the middle. So I go, my Maderita Shirley. So this picture, we can keep this, the next picture is sort of my first memories. This right here, this March, got a little bit of heat stroke on that one, and I was little, I was still in the, you know, the canasta there. And this is sort of the image that I have that continues to recycle in my life. Like marches are a common thing, and tomorrow I'm helping to lead the march, the Chavez and Huerta March in Tucson. So that's a constant, and this is our little family. I'm one of 3 sisters, and then the little one in front is my primita, Sara, who she was like, I want to be in it too. So, you know, we have a history of very strong family ties. And, what I thought was interesting in the last panel that they said, you know, the men are in charge. In our family, the women are in charge. And if the men think that they're in charge, it's only because the woman allowed them to think that. So, to the next one. And this is why. I'm gonna get up. This is a 4-generation picture. So this is my nana, Rafaela Grijalva. That's a picture of her when she was 15. And this is my dad and me and my daughter Avelina, who is now 17. So my nana would always say, no te olvides que naciste por un nopal en la frente, which means do not forget, you know, where you come from, kind of thing. So, right there. So that actually was when I ran for Board of Supervisors, that was my, like, I had the nopal was my image. And I think that, you know, my nana taught me a lot about what it is to be part of a family. And she ran the show. She never spoke English. She got to the 4th grade. She was the only one of her 5 siblings that were born on the Arizona side. So she always reminded my tata, voy a votar, no puedes. I'm like, okay. But it was not it was a privilege and it was her right. Because she knew that her family, nobody could vote. So she had to vote. And that was really important. The other thing that my nana, she never spoke English, never read English, but she didn't know the difference between an A and a B. So she was like, show me your report card, always, from everybody. So she's just a very strong person and the matriarch of our family. And yeah, she ran the show. So the next one is I was on the TUSC governing board for 20 years. And this is my village, right? This was my swearing in. So they said, we have and I bet she's not in there too. They had this thing where they were like, we just do really small, informal swearing in at a public meeting. And I said, no, it's just by my family. And they're like, how do we use that? I'm like, we should use the boardroom. There might be a lot of television. And that's what that was, which was great. And then this picture, my dad is Congressman Raul Grijalva. He was on the TUSC governing board, served there for 12 years, served on the Pima County Board of Supervisors for 10 years, and now is in Congress. So yes, I get that a lot. Are you doing what he does? I'm like, we're just gonna wait a second. We're gonna be really happy in this office that we have now. But this one I remember because this is 2010. And this was after my dad called for a boycott with a lot of community members of Arizona, because of our treatment of immigrants and the fact that it was that law that passed in the state legislature.
Texas.
Yeah, that, if you look brown, I can pull you over. So, you know, he let people know, this is not the state to come to. We are not friendly to immigrants. So I do remember this specifically. And this is us trying to run for office during COVID. We are a very people-powered campaign. You talk to people, you knock on doors, you hug everybody. So this was a really hard one for us. But, you know, my predecessor in my position passed away 7 days before the deadline was to close petition, gathering petition signatures. And oh, by the way, the state had just shut down. So Arizona was a little late to the game, and I had 7 days, 5 business days to get the signatures needed to get on the ballot. Because my predecessor was still on the ballot, and then he passed away. And how are we gonna do that and get physical signatures without being able to talk to anybody? So we got really creative, and yeah, it was very interesting, crazy. This one, I won, yay. So in the first, and the only reason I ran is because, Richard Diaz, who's my predecessor, his wife saw me and said, we can't lose this seat.
Yeah.
This is the same seat that my dad held. Richard took, ran for the position after my dad left.
Sure.
And this office specifically is the one that has always fought for workers' rights and environment and like housing. That was, I mean, that's been the cornerstone of that office. And so it's like, you can't let it go. So in the primary, I won with 66% of the vote, in the general 73.5%. And I think it makes me feel good. But there's my no five. That's why I should have.
Yeah.
That was my B. Okay. So the first day on the Board of Supervisors in 2021, and my last day in January 2021, and my last day on the TLC board was December 23. So for 2 years during COVID, I was doing both, which was kind of crazy. And so as a board member, I fought against English only, fought against immersion, fought for bilingual education, fought against exclusionary practices, suspension, and expulsions because those hurt our kids, specifically our children of color, and fought for equity. And people always say, why aren't you saying you're fighting for equality? Because I'm like, because we need equity, not equality. And that's a big difference. And that was something that I really looked towards our west and south side schools, compared them and to our east side schools, which is a more affluent area, to balance out. And that I thought was so important. We fought for comprehensive sex education. I mean, those were the fights we had. And then the expansion of preschool programs. When I first started, my babies I didn't have any babies. That was one of the arguments of why I shouldn't get get elected. Because I was single, didn't have any kids, and I wasn't married, so why do I care about public education? That was a literal quote, right? And now we have 500% more preschools. And that was great, but we didn't have any money for it because the state of Arizona doesn't pay for it. So one of the first votes that I was able to do is dedicate $10 million of county funds to preschool expansion and focusing on all of our unified districts. So they're like, oh, we'll just give out vouchers. I'm like, we are anti-voucher.
Yeah.
So we do not do vouchers. We're gonna really infuse that funding into our unified districts so those babies stay in that system. But what I thought was interesting is when I first got on this board, they said, well, just so you know, our culture of the audience is really bad. I was like, have you watched a school board meeting? There's no way that they can be as bad. And when I first took over as chair, they didn't want anyone like me telling them what they could and could not do. So I had this woman, my first day as chair, say, and you, Adelita, because they're on a first name basis, right? All those kind of disrespect. You, Adelita, shut up and sit down. No one wants to, no one cares what you have to say. If you want to look it up, just say, Adelita gets screamed out of the board meeting. It's literally, yeah, I know, very nice. So, the next slide, please. And so when I got into this office, I asked, so what do we do? Like, I know what the job title is, but what do our offices do? They're like, whatever you feel like doing. So we're going to continue to go through a strategic plan process because our team account doesn't have one. So we did one ourselves. And so our focus was education, environment, climate resiliency, and helping safe communities. And this is what we've been able to do thus far this year. We have 1,000 students every year have access to quality preschool, and thus far 30 million, next year 40 million. Since 2023, the Pima County Board of Supervisors has secured $9.5 million for development and preservation of over 1,000 housing units, because Pima County wasn't in the affordable housing business. That was a city thing, that was a county thing. it's all hands on deck moment. We had to put some money into that. And then we protected 7,700 acres preserved for future like conservation. So I think that all of that is important. And this is stay in touch with me. The only one I do is Facebook. Everyone else, they help me without the other ones. Sorry. I don't even want to pretend that I do that stuff. But I think that, you know, as a generation, my generation, we took advantage and took the opportunity and stood on shoulders of giants. And so when we talk about, you know, I was asked, so how do you identify? I say Mexican, Mexican American, or Latina. They're like, why don't you say Chicana? And I said, well, because Isabel Garcia is a Chicana. I'm trying to get there. Climbing the way up, right? So that's my litmus test is like, I'm not there yet, right? But I think that it's important that, you know, we took advantage of all the trailblazers that helped us get here. And now I think my generation sort of dropped the ball. We sort of didn't take care of, we sort of didn't nurture, and now we're going back. And if we don't do that, if we don't talk to them about our history, they can't fight it. They can't fight it with real world solutions because I sat there during Monzo meetings. I sat there when they were talking about organizing. I know what that looked like. And we have to do more of it. And I don't want to live in a community and a society where my daughter has less rights than my mom and then me. So, you know, I am the granddaughter of a bracero and the daughter of a member of Congress. That is an opportunity that we have to continue to push the envelope, and I am here for it. So muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rubin.
Thank you. Oops, I don't think it's on. Oh,
There you go.
okay, yeah. So again, thank you for the invitation to be here. I just feel like I'm standing in amidst of so many giants here. So how I became involved in, you know, community work, that, you know, it sounds like an easy question, but I'm reflecting on that and, you know, it's really hard to kind of put a, like a date stamp on it, but I think, so maybe let me back up a little bit. You know, thinking about the word Chicana, the identity, you know, I grew up in a very small town, miles, you know, maybe 3 hours away from the nearest urban center, very isolated, it's a mining town. And the first time we're like one of the first in our block to get a television. And I remember the news reports and I saw some of the protests that were on in the 60s and 70s, you know, all over the place. And I remember asking my mom, as my mother's was Mexican, a Mexican from Mexico, as an immigrant. We only spoke Spanish. And I asked her, I go, Mom, ¿qué es Chicano? And she goes, ¿sabe? You know, but you know, it was attractive to me because I go, these people are fighting for something and I really don't know what. And my mom really wasn't paying attention, you know, to other things. Nobody I knew really knew about anything. So, but you know, it was like a question that I was wondering, you know, well, what's with that, right? But then I think back in terms of some of the other experiences, and I think it was Ophelia this morning who said, you know, when you go to school and all you know is Spanish, and you know they you know they want to keep you back because you don't know English, and you know I do remember my father going to the school and say, well, you know, you want to keep my daughter and you know, hold her back in kindergarten? What's wrong? Is she smart? And I go, well, she doesn't know any English, and he said, this is a school, right? Well, yeah. Well, teacher, you know, it's like it's on you, right? And you know, so but I do remember growing up, and you know, when you get the sense that some things are not right, maybe you're helpless to do anything about it. So it kind of like stimulates that, like there's something wrong with this picture, right? When you see some of your classmates being paddled, you know, and you don't forget And you think, oh, well, yeah, that was back then. Well, you know, when you see corporal punishment when it was allowed, and it's okay to stand a student in front of everybody else and humiliate them for speaking Spanish, you know, you have to say, there's something wrong about that picture, right? And then there's other little things, you know, you start to accumulate some of these things. At age 24, I started working with a local group because in Morenci, which is right next to Clifton, they would give these high school graduation scholarships. Ningún Latino would earn any of those scholarships. I go, what? And, you know, the workforce was like maybe 60, 70% of all Mexican labor. You know, you think, well, there's something wrong with that. There was a fundraising to help get a scholarship, a LULAC scholarship for Latino kids, right? Coming out of high school. You know, you start to kind of put all these things together until finally you do have, basically you just kind of jump in. And even then, sometimes it's not quite planned. You kind of respond in a way. So in 1983, by that time I was married, had 2 kids, we were living in emergency housing. We had a big old copper strike. You know, the 5 big companies in Arizona, I would every 3 years negotiate a contract with their copper workers, all the unions, until our company in Clifton and Morenci decided, well, we're not going to sign on the dotted line. So we were basically isolated. So we're isolated not only in terms of the workforce, but also because we were the only place in which the unions did not have a contract. So that set in motion, probably, I think it's one of the longest strikes in Arizona in modern times. It lasted for 3 years. At that point, I was married to my husband, who was a company physician. And because he was also Mexican, started going up to the picket line. And because he was a doctor, he would start to see his ex-patients on the side for free without charging him, because the company was using medical benefits as a way to get him to cross the picket line. Okay, so when do I come in? So, okay, so then we reached a point where we were on national news, right? Oh, you know, company doctor gets fired because, you know, he's treating poor, you know, the copper workers, and the big bad company won't let him. You know, so there was quite a bit of publicity on that. But what came out of that was that, which I did not know. Again, we kind of learn as we kind of move along. And this is the thing, is, you know, you don't take Chicana classes until you're probably at the university, and we're a long way from that. But then we had this knock on the door, and this group of women said, oh, we've heard about, you know, Dr. Leary being fired. We're here to help. And I go, we should be helping you. And it was like an eye opening, because, you know, these were good people.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it's just shit sandwich what they were doing with these people. So I became involved with the Women's Auxiliary. And because by that time I had some college and I could write letters, well, I put it to use, you know, writing here, writing there, asking for money, asking for support. And one of the things during that time, the Women's Auxiliary, there had been Women's Auxiliary all the time. And usually it was a support system. You jump in, you start to have found, you know, food drives, clothing drives, anything to help the copper strikers that were without income or $50 a week. They were living on $50 a week. And cheese, somebody mentioned the cheese earlier. Yeah, right. It's a cheese. We're like up to here with the damn cheese. But then we kind of moved out of that supportive role. We began to campaign, we began to advocate, we began to agitate. We began to get under the skin of the union leaders who were not doing what they could have been doing to help the strikers. They try to shut us down, and anybody seeing Salt of the Earth, right? That movie when they tell the women, you know, just, you know, calm down here, and they put all the men in jail, but the men were being picked up and put in jail, you know, for picketing. Well, it was the women who basically crossed the boundaries, right? And we got in fights with the union leaders, right? But we traveled nationwide. We started advocating. We went to Chicago, we went to San Francisco. We went all the women. There were women in that group who had never, ever slept away from their husbands, ever, in the 20, 30 years that had been married, right? We fought against our husbands. We fought against the company. We called the rally that attracted so many people nationwide. We had the National Guard called on these two sleepy communities in Arizona, not once, but twice. We were under martial law, right? But because the union leaders threw us out and go, well, okay, so then we don't have to listen to you anyway if you're throwing us out. So we continue to agitate and advocate. Long story short, the strike was over in 3 years after the unions were decertified. The union leaders basically washed their hands of us, but basically we grew as a group. We grew because we had feminists come to Clifton and Morenci. They were interested in our story. And that's where I learned that we were part of a larger movement. And really that was inspiring to know that we were maybe just one little piece of a larger global phenomenon, that we grew. And that's when you realize this is something bigger than us. And now if you, then at that point, if you would ask me, you know, are you Chicana? Well, I would say yes, right? But it took all that time and all that butting your heads against authorities, about leadership, to kind of figure out what your calling was in society. So long stories, again, another just a leap forward. So then basically you carry that struggle with you. I've done it now for education. Right now, my struggle right now is keeping our department, the University of Arizona, keep it supported. That's been difficult in this time. But you know, that's kind of my new a goal right now. The immigrant issues also, I did all that. So anyway, so that's basically how I came to be coming to community work. Now the community is basically a little bit different, but no less improperly treated, just the same. So I'll let it go with that. Thank you.
Eventually being taken over by the steelworkers. But we lived through 7 strikes, and it was really an incredible experience, right? Because my father, as one of the organizers there, had to take care of the strike fund, right? And so everybody wanted that contract. My father went to who? Henry Wong, what we used to call, and it's not a good name, but we did it with love, Los Chinitos. We had over 100 markets that we went to. They were our Circle K, right? You'd say, bien chinitos all the time. And my father, they wanted that contract, and who did my father give it to? But the Henry Wong family, right? So I grew up in all the marches. I remember my father called Raul Grijalva and other leaders to come to the Pickwick Inn. They had a sign that said, no ends allowed. And they didn't allow Mexicans either, but they had that in my lifetime, in our lifetime, Adelita. So my father gathered us all up, and there we were picketing. My father took us to picket Jack Williams, that was sending tear gas to Hermosillo. Remember 68? There was revolution across the world. The students were up in arms. And in Hermosillo, they were picketing. Well, our governor sent tear gas. And so he was being honored, or he was going to be a guest of honor at the Corrida de Toros. There used to be a Corrida de Toros in Nogales, if you can believe it, Nogales, Sonora. And he was going to be the guest of honor. So my father, with his mimeograph, we lived in a little poorhouse, real poor. My mom's house still stands. And little tiny living room, y adentro, he had a mimeograph machine. So there we were, little kids mimeographing, you know, about Jack Williams. And we got to there, and right away they wanted to arrest the kids. And my dad said, they arrested my father for, you know, picketing. So I have been picketing since I was a young kid. You know, it's their fault. What can I tell you? And then when I went to law school, I wanted to be a teacher, really, but you know, I got into this class and said, I can tell you like to argue and win. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's me. So
Exactly right.
So I went to law school, and as a baby lawyer, I just turned 25. I came to Del Rio, Texas. We started the office of Texas Rural Legal Aid, me and Alfa Hernandez, and Richard, yep, se me olvidó su last name, but we started, and the bar group, voted 27-1 against us setting up. So the lawyers didn't want us there, of course, so I was very fortunate to live 2 years in Del Rio, and I learned a lot, right? That's why I'm an honorary Texan, and I married a guy from Texas, and I have 2 kids and stuff, and he's deceased, but I have family and friends in Texas, and it's bad at the border. It's a police state. I hardly wanted to come here, but it's not at the border because the border has been terrible. So I started as a lawyer here. The very first thing as a lawyer, guess what I did as a lawyer? My first act as a lawyer. We did a car show. Lowrider car show in Del Rio, Texas. That was the first thing. That's what they wanted, these kids. And we organized them, and I formed el Comité Cultural del Pueblo, which, by the way, Del Rio City Council wants to change the name because they think it sounds too communist. But my friend Diana said, absolutely not. Diana Abrego is still in Del Rio, created La Casa de la Cultura, which, I mean, in Del Rio, we don't have a Casa de la Cultura in Tucson, and we're a huge place, and Del Rio has a Casa de la Cultura. Hacen de todo. Pottery, guitarras, they do everything. And so I left Del Rio because I fell in love with it, but I didn't want to stay. I wanted to go back to my family. And I did what happened to me in law school. I was in the first year of law school. It was a Friday night, turned on the news. I had already been hearing a lot of bad things about Mexicans. Remember, the Vietnam War had just ended. When there's wars, they want us and the women. When there's end of war, they don't want you. They want to deport you, right? So the Manzo Area Council was raided. And they were doing just helping people fill out applications. And so on Monday, I went to volunteer, and that was the rest is history. Migration and immigrants became, really my passion. Well, 2 passions. I'm a criminal defense attorney. There's nothing more passionate to me than being free. Don't you touch me. Don't you ask me a question. Get out of here. That's what my attitude toward cops. It's like, don't touch me. So the 4th Amendment was really critical to me. So I did become a criminal defense attorney. And I headed up the legal defender's office for 22 and a half years. And I had to go in there. I was 39 years old, the only Latina, of course, in county government. And I had to prove myself. That's what you do when you're a Latina anyway at our age, in our generation. We had to prove ourselves. I had to do, trials and win them all so that I could impress all my group, right? So I did, and I won them all, I have to tell you. But underlying all of that, that's what paid for my family, right? That's what paid for me to be able to do the rest of the work, which my 3rd job was doing the immigrant rights work. And we've been through every single struggle that you can imagine. We have in our possession 3,400 crosses that we began painting and construction in 2000. And 2000, 2001, 2002, all the way till COVID started. So we have over 3,400 crosses. When COVID hit, we were all older. We couldn't get together to do that. So now we do veladoras, but the Mellon Foundation is interested in helping us establish a permanent and a traveling exhibit with these crosses that it really makes you cry if you.
It's a picture.
It's up there, right? We used to go, and we don't do that anymore because we had to get a trailer, a U-Haul at 5 a.m, get 10, 15 people to gather them up, and we'd have to separate the boxes. And so it became too much. It took hours and hours, but we've carried every single one of these crosses. We now go to El Tiradito. We've had a vigil since June of 2000 at El Tiradito, which is a sinner shrine, the only shrine to the sinner in the United States. And we made that the immigrant shrine when the Salvadoreños died. 14 Salvadoreños died in the 80s going through the desert. And they died. And so we started going to El Tiradito, and we were there every Thursday at 7 o'clock for 17 years at El Tiradito, remembering the migrants. And so I know I don't have a lot of time, but I wanna remind people that, we're living through tough times, but it's always been that way. Young DACA students and stuff will, they'll think that maybe all of this just started. I mean, they saw 1070 and they don't know. So I'm gonna read you a quote from a congressman in Texas. This is where our immigration laws are based. That's why I think it's so important to take notice of this region, that we're Mexicanos. Yeah, we're all Latinos, but this wasn't Honduras, this wasn't Cuba, or this was Mexico. It's just a fact. So do not try to lump us all in. We're all just Latinx. Yes, that's a good for unity, but not to disappear us. We are Mexicanos. Mexican American studies must be taught all over this, right? Because we were here. This is our country, right? So let me read you with the very first, the Undesirable Aliens Act, where you know that we had a Chinese Exclusion Act. We mistreated the Chinese. We lynched them. We lynched many Chinese. And what were the industrialists going to do? Oh, hire US citizens? No way. You know what they did? They went to lobby, what they always do. Oh, they put them under Department of Treasury. They went to lobby, and what did they get? Departmental Order of 1916, which said what? Every industry, if you want to get a foreign worker, we were so livid against the Chinese. If you want a foreign worker, you have to pay a head tax, right? Unless when they lobby, unless the worker is from Mexico. And they wonder why we're here. All these years and generations of vénganse, come and build this country, right? And so we've, I gotta close it up, but let me read you this quote, because I think we all need to understand where it is that we fit in this whole scheme of immigration. I don't know how to do it and hold it at us. I mean, okay, there it is. So this is Congressman Box, Democrat from Texas in 1928, Undesirable Aliens Act, right? They read in all this kind of eugenics stuff, but this guy really puts it in. Another purpose of the immigration laws is the protection of American racial stock from further degradation or change through mongrelization. The Mexican peon is a mixture of Mediterranean-blooded Spanish peasant with low-grade Indians who did not fight to extinction, but submitted and multiplied as serfs. Into that was fused much Negro slave blood. This blend of low-grade Spaniard, peonized Indian, and Negro slave mixes with Negroes, mulattoes, and other mongrels, and some sorry whites already here. The prevention of such mongrelization and the degradation it causes is one of the purposes of our laws, which the admission of these people will defeat, right? So it's clear from the very beginning. They took our land and then they said, we're gonna stop you. If you're in, we're gonna deport you. And you know what? We're also gonna punish you. I don't know if you guys know that the biggest crime in federal law, what do you think it is? The one that's prosecuted the most all over the country, the numbers. Let me show you what it is. I gotta show you what it is. Illegal entry. That's what we prosecute. In Tucson, we have a huge court. Everybody thinks look like a catedral. And all it is prosecuting that crime or this crime right here. Being found in the United States in this chair, and I was deported to Nogales in 2007. I didn't even know I was formally deported because I didn't see a judge. They expedited deportations now that they allow, and now I'm subject to a felony 2 to 20 years for being found in the country. That is what the U.S. attorneys are prosecuting all across the country. So I just I'm going to stop. But I was struck by the question, the comment about not knowing how to speak to whites. Let me tell you, I had to go with white people everywhere, schools, law schools, lawyers, it's all white people. I had to do it, right? I went to Del Rio in 1978, and I kid you not, there were Chicanos that were shocked. They couldn't speak to other white people. You're the one who was saying, right? They told me, Diana couldn't speak to white people. Diana Abrego, my comadre and Del Rio, who's now a champion, they could not speak to white people. So I understand that. And when I've gone to Mexico and then when I went to Spain to speak twice, let me tell you, talk about being afraid of speaking. You know, I'm a pocha and I have to speak in Spanish.
Right.
So, anyway, I've run out of time, but, I think that this kind of work is so essential because so many people don't know the history of this whole region.
Right.
You know, I found out at the University of Arizona that they don't even teach a history of labor movement. What is the most substantial movement other than the ending of slavery? I would say it's the labor movement. It changed our bottom line. My father could help create the Chicano middle class in Arizona, right? And give us all things. Do you think that they've been teaching at the universities? Much less all of this. So this is essential. It's almost una nación de burros because they don't teach us our fundamental histories of the genocide of the indigenous, slavery, betrayal of Reconstruction, the labor movement and the immigration history. Nobody knows. Somos burros en este país.
Thank you so much for that inspiration. My name is Vanessa. I am a third year PhD student at the University of North Texas. I'm in the English department, and one of the things that I love about this project is being able to see how English literature is so far off from activism and community engagement work. And it's just opened up the opportunities to like how we can overlap, how we can make it more community engagement based. So thank you so much. So I have two questions. The first question, and I can pass it around so that you have it. How has the political climate in Arizona affected your political and activist work? Was or is there a particular Arizona policy, social issue that has shifted your political work? Can pass this down.
I can go ahead.
Yeah, you
Okay. So I can speak to one thing that I think affected and, Alita as a school board member and Isabel as an immigrant rights attorney, I think we were all connected to SB 1070 that was proposed in 2010. But also the same year, the same month, we had a law passed as well, part of the Homeland Security Act in Arizona, banning Mexican American studies, right? And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of answering this question, I can speak to at least the part that impacted how something like Mexican American studies is perceived by the community, right? It literally scared the shit out of a lot of parents, right? And part of the activism of the students was because these two laws passed like in the same month, and they were taking part in some of the protests about the law during that period. And, they were upset because the laws were not only impacting their families as immigrants. And it's basically a maligning of who they were, their identity. But it did scare a lot of parents. And so then basically the idea that, so we were blamed, Mexican American Studies was blamed, not the university one, but the one that was taught at the K through 12. They had to find a scapegoat. So of course, it's Mexican American Studies that are creating insurrectionists, traitors to the country, revolutionaries, right? That was how these programs at the grade school level were branded, right? A lot of publicity about that. The implications for that is that So it was banned. They came up and they took the books from the classrooms. Teachers, there was divisions in the community, which is very damaging because if you have to work together, a lot of damage in terms of what do we do? We all want the same thing, but we disagree on the methods. That division seeped up into our department. We were basically falling apart in our department. We just couldn't get along enough to find solutions. So, those things are very disruptive to the work that we were doing. And even though we're, I think, back on track, it took years for us to recalibrate. There was a study done in terms of how students identify in terms of their ethnic identity at the University of Arizona. And what that finding show is that before those laws were passed, students were happy to identify as Mexican American or Chicano. After those laws, students were more likely to identify as not Mexican American or Latino, and in fact, were claiming to be half white more. So in those interim, so this, those are the long-term impacts of really vehement, vitriolic political atmosphere in Arizona. And, we just have not had a moment's rest. Now we have the same superintendent who wanted to ban Mexican study. Again, superintendent, we attacking the language of immigrant students in the classroom, wanting to kind of punish teachers for teaching Spanish or trying to help students in Spanish.
Just filed a lawsuit, Tom.
Yeah.
Just filed a
They
lawsuit.
follow, exactly. So it's like, when do we get to do our work? We have the work of activism, advocating for our communities, but we also have other work. So we basically have the double work of not only doing the work that we know that is necessary for our communities, as educators, as whatever it is you do, in addition to finding those healing spaces for our community, getting them to be able to work together and resist, find the strength. And the more damage they do to learning our history, learning to why we are here, learning to defend ourselves with the facts, with our history, and knowing that we are not to blame for whatever the grievances they might be experiencing. I'm sorry that their feelings are so hurt, but we really have to get on with our business of strengthening our communities, and all this is intended to weaken our resolve, but si se puede.
Arizona is pretty toxic. We are lucky that we have a Democratic governor. She has vetoed about 150 bills. Imagine that. All the worst bills you can imagine. We've had to live with a border strike force, state border strike forces. You do in Texas as well, but the political situation has been very bad in Arizona. Yeah, so it has stifled our work. Going to one of the questions that somebody else had about women, without us working with each other, we wouldn't be anywhere. Our groups are women. Derechos Humanos is women. Manzo is women. We're all women we just held a few of these, the National Network for Immigrant Refugee Rights held 4 human rights institutes along the border in Texas where we need them. There were 128 people, 120 of them were women, only 8 guys. So, I think that's where our power lies, is in the women.
I think you covered that one. I can just speak to what it was like to be on a governing board when they were attacking bilingual education. When they were attacking Mexican American studies. What we did is we just changed the name to culturally relevant. Yeah, so we still have culturally relevant. We have perspective. So my daughter was taking American history, Mexican American perspective. My son is taking English, Mexican American perspective. So we have a lot of that happening in our schools because I think it's really critical. They went through a whole process, got the curriculum approved, and now we have the same racist superintendent of public instruction in Arizona, Tom Horn, and now he's coming back to say he's going to start penalizing schools, fining schools for teaching bilingual education. But So, and he lost, and he's gonna continue to lose. But the unfortunate part is that we keep getting distracted by actual work, by having to put up, fight against these really toxic and dumb laws. And unfortunately, our states trade with bad laws. So Texas will come up with this crazy harebrained thing, and Arizona's like, ooh, good idea, let's pick it up. And so, we have to continue to fight to identify our history, and Arizona starts with us too. But we have to identify our history because it's here where textbooks are being changed. Like, so it's why this work is so critical in documenting your own history, because I foresee without a significant shift in ideology, that we're gonna be fighting a lot more, so I make sure our history is represented. I mean, my kids do not learn the same things I do. Fortunately, we're still in the States and in a district that values diversity, but not every kid in Arizona can say that. Some of them are designed by curriculum and by restrictions on the teachers to be very prescriptive about what they teach and don't teach. And the fact that you have to get a parent permission slip to talk about biology is just crazy bonkers to me, so.
Thank you so much. Second question. So listening to your beautiful stories, I saw the common theme of identity. So my question is, what does it mean to own your Chicana identity in the Arizona community?
I think for me, it's something that's a little different than it used to be, when I was younger. I have this image of what a Chicano and Chicana look like, and it's very much the typical, the picture that we saw with the brown berets, with the marching, with the adelita, with the trenzas. That is my image of what a Chicana is. And I have to appreciate that that has to evolve, because we have the opportunity to engage much younger people in this struggle with us. And if if we're not someone that looks like them, if we're not someone that's creating a welcoming space, then we don't give them the opportunity to say, hey, you can do it, I can too. So what was really cool is when I was coming on the plane, there was this little girl sitting in first class with her mom. And as I'm walking by, to the back, to the middle cabin, she gets all excited, she goes, and I was like, hi, and I'm thinking she thinks I'm someone else. And so I'm just smiling and waving, and I thought she was waving at everyone. She's like, and her mom looks at her all crazy, like, who is that? She came to read in my class. She read this book called Adelita. And I was like, so people think I'm crazy because every level of reading for a whole month, I would go to every school in our district. I did it in Tucson Unified, to every school in the district. I read stories that are written by authors of color. And I was able to read The Proudest Blue, which is a story about a young lady that was wearing her first day hijab. It's blue, right? And it's this whole story. And I look out to a second grade class, and there's a little girl there with a little blue hijab.
Right.
It was too much. And then she goes, I was like, I said, so what do you guys think of that? She's like, I would hope we should in her hand. And not like that I embarrassed her, right? Because I was worried about that. She goes, I'm wearing a blue hijab and I'm proud to. So her teacher turned and starts crying, and I'm like trying not to cry, because it's I think that that's the opportunity that we have to be the faces of people that are like, if she can do it, then I can too. And so that's what I continue to try to do.
I guess what I can speak to this is that, somebody asked me, so what's the difference between being Mexican American and Chicano or Chicanx? I go, well, the difference is that being Chicano, Chicanx is that you're like a woke Mexican American, right?
Yeah.
And now with wokeness being again, demeaned in our political rhetoric, like it's something bad. But, I think we're just, we need to basically reaffirm, the messaging that the identity of being Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx means to this country and to those who are coming up after us. The movement did open up spaces for us to become and be other people to pass down some of the knowledge that we accumulated. What happens when we stop identifying ourselves as that? There are many people who are Hispanic or Latinxes who do not embrace the wokeness, which I find problematic. And if you use Chicanx, Chicano, Chicana, you're saying, I am woke, right? But again, it's like what happened in Tucson, where, all of a sudden being Mexican or Mexican American is something bad. We really have to fight to reclaim that name, because that name means everything. There's a symbolism that this land was Mexico. There's a reason why we ended up here on this side of the border, and others ended up on the other side. It's the reason why I have a Mexican immigrant mother, and like many others, it's a reason why, we intermarry with those who are coming at some point, that is our reason. This is why we are who we are, the language. So we still speak Spanish, it hasn't been erased. I know the United States is a place where languages come to die, as they say. Why, we still speak Spanish, maybe some of us a little bit better, some medio pochas and medio Spanglish, pero las hacemos como podemos. And you know what? It's semiotic. It translates an understanding that we are here because of this history. You erase that, you erase the history. You erase the history, you erase the people, right? So this is why it's important to have not only programs with that name in it, but people who are willing to say, soy mexicana, soy chicana, por eso estamos aquí, por eso no los vamos, Otherwise, you know what, it's the beginning of just an erasure, which by changing the names of something, you basically erase that whole history, you erase the people, you erase everything that made us who we are. So we gotta stop, we gotta resist that, we gotta assert those programs with our name on it, protect them, not because, we're better than anybody else, but because that's a way of preserving that history. Otherwise, se va eso, nos vamos nosotros, and after a while, there won't be any distinguishment, but the discrimination will continue. I can assure you that much. You can't erase the color. And what will you have to protect yourself with? So, just kind of the assertiveness, hey, be woke and be proud of it, ¿qué? I'm woke, ¿qué pues? A ver.
Well, I don't have much to add. I just want to say that it's so important for me to be a Chicana. My parents had to fight to be Mexican Americans. We fought to be Chicanos, and now our young kids, they want to be indigenous. And I think that's a great thing. They're finding their indigenous voices. And I have to say that I'm really proud that at Derechos Humanos, we knew that the borderlands wasn't just Mexicanos. We knew there was indigenous groups. So we started the Alianza Indígena Sin Fronteras 26 years ago. We've got an organization that's 26 that deals with a lot of indigenous people crossing. And of course, now with a new crossing, they developed a language. And anyway, I think the identity, when somebody fights for an identity, it's really powerful because people can see it. Young people, other people, we were at the conference this weekend at the U of A, and I said hi to this lady. She was sirviendo us. She was so great. Oh, yo te conozco from the TV, eres la Chicana. I mean, we have to be there as Chicanas, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to take the microphone around if you have any questions. Thank you so much, ladies. I really have enjoyed this presentation. But I'm sitting here thinking, I have 4 grandchildren, 4 hombres, and I think our biggest challenge is the media. Se miran en small, tengo 2 nueras.
en their values también. Me acuerdo cuando mi nieto nació en el Carter. Y mi mamá dijo, esa no es la marca de la ropa de los niños. Va a tener el nombre de la marca de los niños. So, you know, challenge to try and, como dijo mi nieto Carter, he wants to be black. And
Yeah.
he wants to be black.
Yes. Yes.
And all of that is fine.
Yes.
That is fine. As long as you make sure he doesn't forget las raíces.
Yes.
Let it go through all those, journeys, through all those stages in his vida. Let him at some point, as both my son and my mother-in-law, why did you name it Carter? You know,
Mm.
pero digo yo que lo que pasa es que people such as yourself and such as us, we need to keep working at this and make sure we teach one person at a time, we will have done our job. Because ahorita we're fighting against social media, we're fighting against, you know, things in the escuela and what have you.
Yeah.
Si quiera hacerse hair kinky,
Uh-huh.
because he wants to be black,
Uh-huh.
se lo hiciera. And I don't, you know, the black, I don't.
But it's not him, huh?
Pero I think we need to continue working.
Yes.
Sure, que no se les olviden sus raíces.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think our babies are expert code switchers personally. So like, I think we just changed it. So my niece and nephew are African American and Mexican American, yeah? So they're half and half, and they go to a school where they learn bilingual education, and they're in an immersion program, 90% Spanish. My sister doesn't speak as much Spanish at home as she should, so these babies learned it like this, right? So it's so funny because when my niece was 4 and she's pulling up to the school, and they're like, "Who are you here for?" If the white monitor asks, she goes, "Floyd Thompson." But if the Chicana monitor comes up, she goes, "For Floyd Thompson." And I just think that it's so cute. When you ask her, her name is Belen with the accent. She goes, "Don't forget the acento." And I'm like, "You're right, girl." And I think what's important is like, I think they're very comfortable, just like most of us become comfortable. It's like, there's certain environments that this is where I feel comfy and this is where I'm not. But I just think it's interesting because, social media has a lot of negatives. And I think the biggest one as a mom of 3 teenagers is their emphasis on what you look like body size and that kind of stuff. A lot of, really, a lot of misinformation, a lot of people that are pretty charismatic. And then, you know, you start questioning, I always question my kids about their political beliefs. I don't assume that they're gonna be, just like me. But it's like, well, we have to get ready to debate. If we don't agree, then we get to debate on it. And I think that that's important too in watching, you just have to monitor what they're on. And it's a lot of work to do. And for those of us who are not digital natives like me, I put a lot of work into figuring it out. It's hard.
Right. Thank you so much for what you have shared with us. Just one question in terms of the context that we're in today. Do you have hope or do you feel like sense of despair? And you also sort of mentioned a disconnect between your generation and perhaps the young generation today as moving forward. How do you see that in maybe the next 10, 50 years or so?
I have a lot of hope. And this generation coming up does not have some of the hangups that we can deal with. And so I see it all the time with my own kids. It's a beautiful perspective to have because they don't understand why you can't just love who you love. Like, why does it matter what they look like? Like, why does it matter who they are? I mean, there's just some norms for the generation, this one and the younger one, that it doesn't make sense to them. And I think a lot of it too is they have a lot of interest in political issues, but not so much the party, there's the Democrat, Republican, they're somewhere floating. And I think that that's a really kind of wonderful opportunity for us as a nation to like, what is this next generation gonna bring? I'm very optimistic. But, you know, I have the perspective of having, you know, some pretty opinionated kids that I raised, so they get to tell me a lot.
You know, I don't think we can even operate without having hope. Otherwise, I just, you know what, I'll see you later. I'm going home now, right? I think we're all here because we're by nature hopeful people, you know, in spite of ourselves. But the thing about despair, I think is important to kind of talk about. You know, when I grew up in that very small mining town in a rural area of Arizona, you know, there was some majority minority kind of makeup. I didn't grow up with a lot of hangups until I started waking up to the hangups, to the problems of some of the racism, right? But you know, this was a small town where everybody knew each other. When I started seeing problems was because you had a white girl dating a Mexican boy, right? I mean, then you had the parents would ground the girl because they say, no, you can't do that. You started to see some of those things. So I mean, but then it was like a little bit later. I think right now we are in a very interesting and despair triggering moment in our country. And I think it's really important that we don't give in to despair. I fear that, you know, I had a more or less a great childhood, a good childhood, but the kids nowadays, it's a whole different world. And I think, you know, you hear of mental, you know, as young people in depression and having crisis, you know, and crisis of identity. And I think it's really important that they know their roots. And it goes back to the comment earlier, you know, like, I'm afraid that maybe my grandkids don't have that firm grounding in who they are, that gives them the strength to resist the attacks on who they are because of what they look like. If we don't give those kids a firm grounding, you know, like they did with you, Isabel.
Yeah.
This is who we are. This is who we are. And this is this is what we've been up against. But nunca los vencimos. We move forward. You know, we had our obstacle. The panel this morning, the women. Nobody opened the door for us. We're, you know, pounding and, oye, ¿qué pasó? And how do I do this? And, you know, this is how we got around. You know, but I don't know. I see our kids now, and sometimes I wonder if they can even cross the street without like, yeah, without assistance. I really worry maybe because they reap the benefits of our generation. You know what? We made it easy for them.
Yeah.
Now they're like useless. You know, but I think just giving that firm grounding, you know who you are, know your history. Nobody has a right to push you around. You have rights in this country, regardless. I mean, Isabel, I remember, I always tell my students this, there's only one constitution.
No, yeah.
I always remember, there's not a constitution for immigrants. There's not a constitution for this group. There's one, right? We all have rights under that constitution, right?
One right.
But how do you demand those rights if you're like lost in this world? If we lose our kids because we don't have programs, because we have watered down programs, and I hate to say this, but you know, I know they have now the Mexican American perspective and culturally relevant education, but by having said culturally relevant education, you've already erased the Mexican, you already erased Chicano from that.
Yep.
And you're given a little bit and take a mile. So, you know, it's just those little pieces of resistance, we just gotta call them out when we see them, and we might be the people that do, allá ven otra vez. But you have to, you really have to, you know, you give a little bit And they take a mile, so you just gotta push back, push back.
Very-
So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You're
thank you for
hopeful.
your question.
If you're hopeful. Well, I think Anna did say it right, that we're obviously have to be an optimist to even be here. To do anything, I mean, you have to be optimistic. I don't know how though. We're facing really some giant crisis. One's the climate and the environment, and the other one is a social crisis. And we are in crisis. We cannot kid ourselves. We're in big crisis right now. And then to top it off, all the young kids have given up their rights to privacy long ago. You probably did too. All these people that have all these apps on Facebook and no les importa. So now we're losing all privacy, right? And that's gonna be really critical. But I am hopeful only because of the young people. Right. Only because I have trust that they will be able to come forward. And I'm telling you, the DACA kids and the kids that came out of the, Wall Street and all of that, those are the kids that really have something going. The DACA kids, I remember in 2000, going to a class of fifth graders, or 2004, whenever 187 was being done in California. Miss, did you know that 187, the kids died when they didn't take them to the hospital? Miss, did you know I couldn't go to my Nana's funeral in Nogales because I don't have a document? I don't have document. Miss, did you know that my father didn't come home for months and we cried and he finally called us from Mexicali and they deported him and what have you? Miss, did you know that we were crying Friday night. We thought my dad was deported. He got home at 3 a.m. drunk. And so they had a family fight because we all thought he had been deported, right? I mean, these young kids, I thought, oh my God. And sure enough, I saw them marching in 2006 and they are the leadership right now. No longer do we have to topar with Democrats who say, well, there's the good immigrant, the bad immigrant. Well, we have to protect them. These young people came out and said, don't talk about my mother bringing me illegally without my knowledge. I'm going to fight for my mother. My 17-year-old brother who had a marijuana cigarette and he got deported, he should be back, right? They stood with us and Derechos Humanos finally was not, the radical militant ones. We were always the radical militant until the young people came. Because the old Democrats were all, Isabel, Congressman Gutierrez, Isabel, we gotta do this and that. No, the young people taught us how to do it. They were undocumented and unafraid. They're the ones who went and made Obama do that thing. Because he said 27 times, I can't do it, it's not allowed in the law. And they pressured and they got it. So that I'm hopeful for, that kind of activity. Yeah.
And my granddaughter lives in New York, in the Bronx. She was raised in New York. And the funny thing is that in New York, if you're Latina, you're usually Puerto Rican or American or one of those. So she was in preschool. Yo soy mexicana. Yo soy mexicana. And everybody is Mexican. And he was raised in Austin. He was a mariachi
Love it.
singer
Love it.
and dancer. And I'm talking, and he calls himself Mexican.
Mexican.
No, Mexican. Oh, I love it.
And he has been teaching in Korea for about 10 years now.
Amazing.
And he just, very young people that have had to adjust themselves. We have made some changes so this can happen,
Yeah, so,
but they have taken over.
yeah, they have.
They have taken over, and we hope that it continues. to.
So,
Yes.
yes, as long as you don't forget.
You can be part of what it is you are, and you should.
Yep. I'll tell you, the young people have taught us a little bit of self-care. We come from the Dolores Huerta time. Oh, no, you got to go to all the meetings. No haces nada for fun. And the young people have taught us, oh, no, I'm gonna go get my nails done. Oh, no, I'm gonna go get a massage. So they've taught us to take care of ourselves, and I want to thank them.
I did that yesterday, Chief.
Oh, yeah, you did.
I'm sorry.
But
It
you
was my,
read.
I had needed to feel really bad, so I figured it out. I think that I think it's really good for us to, just, I think look to the next generation for inspiration. Because I think that some of the fights that we had to fight, they're dealing with our generation and the earlier generation is just like racism. But most of the young people that I talk to, when you say things that are just not okay,
Yeah.
they know it's not okay. Like, that's why I'll read these books about, this person said something about their dark hair, and this kid right away, second grade, raises his hand and goes, that's racist. That's correct. It is, but that didn't used to happen 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they didn't identify that way. It didn't come up that way. Now they see it and they're quick to call it out, which I think is a good thing. We have a wonderful opportunity in public education. It is the melting pot, and that's why I fear so much the attack on public education.
Yes.
Because it's the constant defunding, the constant training, that is where everyone, you mix it up. You have children that have a little more, you have some that have a little less, you have a really diverse group of ethnicities and genders and identities, all at public school. And what's happening with the continued pool of dollars, especially in Arizona, is that those communities are getting more and more homogeneous. You have the kids that don't have the money to go to private school, that's why they're in neighborhood school, as opposed to what was before, where like everyone just went to their neighborhood school. So I think that to me, I'm so privileged to have the opportunity to serve on a diverse school district like that, because that is my constant number one all the time. I'm always asking about, so what are we doing? How are we involving our students, and how are we supporting our public schools? Because that has to be the number one.
I don't know if you guys know this, but Arizona voters like three times rejected school vouchers and the charters. 3 times we voted. And the governor, right before he left with his Republican minions, went ahead and instituted this charter program for anybody. It's the neoliberal policies being applied to school. Neoliberal policies, you can just do it on your own. Don't tell me what doctor to go to. Don't tell me what teacher. I'm gonna pick my own pretty soon. We're all left alone. And that's what's going on in Arizona. It is really, they started studying us in 71. They started seeing that the entering classes were kids of color. They've been attacking us then because public education, look, a loudmouth Chicana, why do we want her? A loudmouth professor, why do we want them, right? I mean, they don't want us. And so, anyway.
They break down the communities.
Yeah.
They break down the communities, what they're doing, making everything autonomous.
Everything.
Yeah.
Well, Arizona just cut all higher education funding. No
All community college was cut.
Like Arizona.
100%.
100% community college.
Tenure.
And community colleges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You too bad to get tenure, so it's out of here.
Yep.
Up the class.
Ooh, a bar.
Yeah.
Policies on to